welcome if you're new here. I'm Amy, and today we're studying one of the most courageous acts of faith in the Bible, a story you've heard since you were a little kid if you've been in church your whole life. Daniel staying faithful even when he could have cost him everything in the lion's den. I'll be walking you through it using my simple method, a process that makes Bible study clear, creative, and totally doable. So let's dive into that classic story of Daniel in chapter 6 and see what bold faith really looks like from our adult perspective. All right, here we go. We're going to start on the simple method, which is an acronym for the steps I take when I study a passage. In a past video, I covered chapter 4, and I've got the notes over here, so you'll want to go back to my YouTube channel, and there'll probably be a link in this video to more Daniel notes, but for sure, you can get these notes. I can walk them through them with you in another video. So always make sure to go back, and if you're trying to do that last step, expand and figure out what to study next, this YouTube channel is a great way to take the stress out of that decision-making process. It always recommends videos throughout the video and then at the end, of course. So you can bookmark this, subscribe to it, so that every time you want to dig deep and take notes in your Bible, you just have to pop over here to your channel, to this channel. And I love doing this because it's not just me telling you what I think. We're actually opening our Bible and seeing what God has to tell us. So today we're going to walk through the simple method for Daniel chapter 6. We're in a series that has a theme of faithfulness as we walk through all the different fruits of the Spirit this year. So this is week 3. You can also go back and look at those other videos where we talk about what is faithfulness. What does that mean? What does the Bible have to say about it? So here we go. We're doing SIMPLE. And let's start with that first step, which is study. So in study, we are going to be reading the passage and highlighting things that stick out to us that we could take notes on. So it could be context, it could be the name of the people in the story, it could be the setting, it could be the problem, it could be all kinds of things. It could be action words if we can't find those kind of story elements. It could also be unknown words. We're like, okay, I've seen this word. I really don't know what it means. Let's look it up. So all those things that you want to take notes on and notice and help us make those connections as we're organizing our thoughts in each step. So here we go. In chapter 6, we're going to do a little flipping because it is on 2 pages in my Bible. But we are Daniel chapter 6. I'm going to just start highlighting things that stick out to me, and I'll kind of talk you through that as we go. Daniel in the den of lions. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. Okay, so I already am going to highlight this. I know this is going to be the main idea of this passage. I've got a king, Darius, 3 administrators, one of whom was Daniel. So I've learned there's a king named Darius. He's appointing people that are satraps. That's another word I could look up later to know exactly what is that. 3 administrators over them. So he had these people with 3 people ruling over them. That was Daniel. And the satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel was so distinguished among himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Now this is one of those things where it's like, wait, how did this happen? That's where we'll do in another step called link, where we will look at what came before, what came after, so that we're getting some more context for this. But for now, let's keep reading. Verse 4, at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel and his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Okay, so here's kind of the problem. It sounds like they're just jealous of his leadership, of his power, and so they're trying to figure out how to kick him out. Okay, they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God." So he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. And it looks like he is faithful to his God. Verse 6, so these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den." Okay, so here's the rule that they're trying to pitch to him. Anyone all the way to the lion's den. "Now, your majesty, issue the decree." All right, here we go. I'm going to flip. "And put it in writing so it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. I'm going to highlight this and we'll find out why that's important too. "Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to God or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown in the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." As I'm reading this, I want to go back and highlight when Daniel learned verse 10. So that's important because it tells me he knew he was going to be punished if he did this, and he did it anyways. It wasn't that he did it and then realized, "Oh, I broke the law." He did this knowingly. So I think that's important. So I'm going to highlight that again in verse 10. And then verse 13, we're back. "Then they said to the king, 'Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing.'" Exile from Judah, that's important too. "He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and make every effort until sundown to save him. So the king was upset by this because he loved Daniel. He wanted to make him leader over everything, over the kingdom. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So they said this 3 times. Now it's getting annoying. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, who you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the ring of his nobles, so Daniel's situation might not be changed. And then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. So the king sounds like a good man. He's trying to do the right thing. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. So I'm just kind of highlighting following the story events. "And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children." Yikes. "And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, 'May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is a living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of King Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay, so the reason I highlighted what I did was so that when I'm reading or someone else is reading and then they're like, okay, let's talk about what we just read. Like, unless I am highlighting as I'm going, 90% of the time I'm like, I have no idea what we just read. I spaced out, or I couldn't focus just listening or trying to keep up with what they were reading. So most of the time when people ask, okay, let's talk about what we just read, during that time, that silence time where they're trying to get somebody to raise their hand, I'm skimming over it again. I'm like, what? Okay, what did we read? Now I'm looking in my mind, like, what are some main points that I can focus on? And so what this step does is it helps me answer that question quicker, or be able to not have to skim because I've done that so detailed as I was reading through or listening to somebody read. So now I can literally look at the highlights and just kind of glance over those real quick, even as I'm answering the question. Well, we had Daniel, who was a man that wasn't corrupt. He was trustworthy, and people that were jealous of him getting power made a rule that anyone who prays to any god or human being except the king should be thrown in the lion's den. So then I'm looking over here. So Daniel knew this rule and he went and prayed anyways. And so these men who had tricked the king told them about this, and the king, who was very upset that he'd been tricked, had to follow the law and threw him in the lion's den. But when he checked on him the next morning, God had saved him. He had shut them out to the lions. And then the men who had falsely accused him were thrown into the lion's den along with their families. And then the whole kingdom worshiped God because the king commanded it. So that's a way for me to either answer that question in class or retell it to my kids, or just in my own personal quiet time, answer that question myself. Okay, what did I just read? So that's why I love that first step. I think it's so important to highlight because it gives you that visual. So the next step is illustrate. And what we're going to do is basically take those highlights and we're going to go back over them as we just did, looking for things to illustrate that can help us organize the story so that we can start making connections and taking some value out of this story. So, for example, we've got one thing that I thought I would illustrate is there's a lot of characters in this story, and it's really hard for me to kind of keep them straight. And some of these terms I don't even really understand. It might be interesting for us to look up these relationships of these leaders. So right here, I'm looking at, it said prefects. There was a line that had prefects. It was listing all those different people. There it is. So there was a line, actually I didn't highlight it, that says in verse 7, the royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, governors all agreed the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree. So while this might not be like a super important detail, it gives me a good context for what's happening in here. And so I'm going to actually pull that out and doodle those real quick, because I think it's important for me to kind of understand the way that the government was run back then, because not only is it going to give me context for Daniel chapter 6, it will give me context for half of the Old Testament and how these places were run and how there was corruption and abuse of power and things like that. So this is one of those things where I would like to illustrate, and I'm going to write that it's in verse 7. We've got the king We've got royal administrators. And I don't have to label in this illustrate step, but I'm just going to anyways. Prefects, satraps, advisors, governors. Okay, so in order for me to figure out what goes with this, I can get out a dictionary, I can start doing all that, but in the illustrate step, we're not really getting that deep yet. We can kind of fill in the blanks of the things we don't know in a later step. So right now I'm going to look at what I do know. The king, I know, is ruler over all these. He's the guy who wears the crown, so I drew the crown. The royal administrators, right here, remember in verse 2, it says 3 administrators. So there were 3, and that was Daniel. He was also, he had 120 satraps, remember in verse 1, with 3 administrators over them. So these were the men where there was 120 of these guys, and these were the guys that came up with that plan. So I'm going to draw that they have angry eyes because they're devious, which that guy, his face, what happened to his face? Okay, so they're jealous of Daniel. They're the one that come up with a plan for the lion's den. So that's what I know. I don't know anything about the prefects, and I'm assuming that the reason they wrote them in this order is probably because that's an order of importance. So that's why I wrote that too. And that's something we can look at later. So let's see, we have administrators here, satraps. I'm just going to start circling these words so that I can maybe find some more information. Administrators, satraps, the king, administrators, and satraps. I'm probably saying this wrong and I apologize, but that's part of the learning process. I can look up how to say it later in another step even. Okay, so down here in verse 6, it usually says administrators and satraps in every single phrase. When is a group to the king. So it sounds like if these administrators and satraps went to the king, it sounds like the other 2 were against him as well. So I'm just going to do this real quick to show that it wasn't just these guys that he was ruling over that were jealous. It was also his other 2 royal administrators, and they went to the king and told him to do this. So advisors, I don't know much about advisors, but they're giving him advice. So I'm going to just draw this speech bubble. It doesn't tell us much about a governor, but I know that a governor rules over a region, so, or makes laws. So I'm going to just draw something that we're familiar with as governors is that they are in charge of a section. They kind of help make those rules. I know they're not judges, but I'm just drawing a little judge hammer to show that they help run that tiny area. Prefects, I should know what this word is, but it's some kind of leader that helps run things. But that's something that I'm going to look up in another step and get. I don't want to make a guess here, so I want to know specifically what does that person do. So I'm going to look that up in a different step, which is link, where we get more into the historical context. But let's move on to map. And we could consider this a map. We have illustrated and kind of made a graphic organizer, because we're even showing that this is the power highest rank to lowest rank. I'm assuming that that's the way it is. But this is already a graphic organizer, so we could leave it right there, or we could look at something else we could make for a graphic organizer if you want to keep going. So I'm actually going to flip over to the other side and draw on that side because this is a 2-pager. So I'm just going to look for something else. We've outlined a lot on that first page of the just kind of the context. And now I'm going to look at more of the storyline. So what we can do for a graphic organizer, one thing I thought we could do is just find all those words that describe Daniel. Throughout all of this, it talks about how he was not negligent, he was trustworthy. So we could do a circle map, which is just a circle of the word and of the main idea that we're trying to define, and then write the words around it. So you could do a circle that says Daniel and write trustworthy, not negligent, faithful to God, all those kinds of things that you notice. And then the other thing we could do, which I'd like to do, is a flow chart, which is basically just sequencing the story and telling what happened in the story. It's a quick retelling. So I'm actually going to do that. And a flow chart is just kind of talking about event 1, event 2, and you can do it any order or any design you want. You could just do one rectangle underneath each rectangle, or you can do kind of like I did right here, where we're just following the arrows. So I'm going to do that just for fun. Just because I like it visually to kind of mix it up. So you can do arrows wherever you want, however you want, or you could just do one line where arrows just keep going down. So right here, I'm just going to write Daniel is, what did we say? Administrator? Yes. King wants to promote him, basically. Other leaders are jealous. Let's see. Oh, you probably need to see what I'm doing. So I'm just kind of going through when I summarized at the very beginning. I'm just trying to remember those things. You can look over here in the highlights, but I'm just trying to kind of look at what happened in the story. If this is confusing to you that I'm going all over the place, you can even label it with these numbers. It's just the sequence of events. So Daniel becomes the palace administrator. The king wants to promote him. The other leaders get jealous, so they devise a plan. Daniel he defies the rule, and then he's thrown into the lion's den. For praying, basically. And then because of that, God protects Daniel. King kills the leaders. Entire kingdom worships God. This is a giant flowchart that's very messy and all over the place, but I like the visual. It helps me understand what's going on. You can even go in and highlight it according to the characters, like Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. This step, I didn't write his name, but Daniel is thrown. Then we've got the king. You don't have to do this step, but this is just a way to kind of keep the story straight. And then we've got those other leaders. So you kind of see the connection of the people throughout the story. And these colors don't stand for anything. I'm just kind of sorting them into the character. So I did the king in orange, the leaders in yellow, and Daniel in green. So that you see, and then you can do even God protects, they worship God, he's praying to God, praise to God. So you can add to it as you like. So we took a ton of notes this time. Let me flip over here, grab that Post-it, and talk about the next steps. So now we're going to personalize this passage. And personalize is where I like to say, okay, how can, not so much focus on what does this have to do with me in like a selfish way, but what can I take from this lesson to be transformed, to be more of what God is calling me to be. And so you might look at what's the lesson in this story. Well, the thing that we're celebrating right here is that even though Daniel defied his government because of what happened in his life, his example, the whole kingdom ended up worshiping God because he displayed God's greatness by saying, I'm going to pray to God. They threw him in the lion's den. And then when they woke up in the morning, he was able to give this testimony of how God protected him. And that impacted more than just Daniel. It impacted the entire kingdom. So that's really cool to see just that connection of the choices we make can have literal kingdom impacts, which is a really cool, a really encouraging insight into this story. So one thing I might take from this is that I want to look into those characteristics of Daniel. I want to pray to have those characteristics of Daniel. Lord, I pray that people see me as trustworthy. I pray that I am not showing, what are the words they used? I'm not negligent. I'm not corrupt. I'm looking back in that text and praying the words that I'm seeing. Lord, I pray that I have an impact on the world to the point that leaders are saying, for he is a living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed because of my faithfulness, because of your faithfulness. So you're just turning this into a prayer. You could also find something that's a memory verse that you could write down so you could remember the things that you've learned in this story so that you remember to personalize them. Or thank you, God, for rescuing me in my situation, just like you rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. What's a good verse we could say? You could just memorize any of this that he says right here, or remembering when Daniel learned the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows were open towards Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed. Maybe this is something you want to start doing. You want to pray every day. You want to try this 3 times a day for a week and see what happens in your spirit and your life and your mood, giving thanks to God as he'd done before. And so these are just habits that you can find. They've got so many resources on Daniel, the Daniel fast, and just there's so many like applications from the book of Daniel. It's a great book. And then the other thing that you can do is journal. So maybe you're journaling these prayers, you're journaling these thoughts. What can I learn? How can I be transformed from what I've learned in this text? Okay, the next step is link, and that's the one I keep referencing a lot. This might be where you look up the word prefect in a Bible dictionary, or even just Google it, the general definition of a prefect, and then or look up in a Bible manners and customs or cultural studies Bible to look up like the roles of the leaders back then. You could also look into my study tools, which is one thing I had highlighted, that he was doing this in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians. So I want to show you real quick why that's important. If you have been over to my site, I've got lots of tools. I've got the Bible maps and genealogies and cheat sheets of each book of the Bible. I just got this in the mail. It's my brand new book that you guys are pre-ordering right now. I'm almost ready to hit publish on this. I'm so excited. So make sure you pre-order this so that you get access to a bunch of extra stuff plus free shipping. I've got a whole library of all of my notes that's exclusive to my pre-orders. But what I wanted to show you was there's some tools in here that show you a little bit more about that. So right here, we've got the Old Testament maps back when the kingdom was united and Solomon was the king, and then the kingdom split, it became Israel and Judah. Well, down here you see then they were taken over by Assyria and then Babylonia, and then they were Babylon was overthrown by the Medo-Persian Empire. And that's what we're referencing right here when they say, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, because they're living in this time, the Medo-Persian area. So King Darius is one of the leaders of this Medo-Persian Empire. And so that kind of helps you get a context of what they're talking about there. And then the other thing you can do is flip all the way over to the book of Daniel. And then you can get some more information. So Daniel is a major prophet during the exile to Babylon. He's a high-ranking administrator under the Babylonians and then the Persians. This is his other name. You might see him go as, this is his Israelite name. This is his Medo-Persian name that he's assigned. Okay, and then you've got more information. It talks about King Cyrus. It talks about Daniel in the lion's den down here, chapter 6. So it gives you a lot of insight. And then something that's unique to this book that I don't have on my digital pages that you guys are familiar with is this book not only has a lot of those extra Bible basics resources that I've added to the front, it's got some stuff you won't find anywhere else, such as this index, which is amazing. So down here, you look up Daniel, and then it says that nickname or that other name he has. And then I've got every page I list Daniel on. So that's something I want you to know, that I've got this tool of everything I've researched. I've organized it even more for you. So Daniel's not just on that page that says Daniel. He's all throughout this book. Next thing we've got is expand, and that's our very last step. And what I want you to do in this step is to try applying the simple method this week to another passage, either the next section, or you could dig deeper into one of these steps. Maybe you really want to look up those things we talked about for link. Maybe you want to draw that map for Daniel and his characteristics. Maybe there was something else you wanted to illustrate, or maybe you wanted to go back in the study step and start color coding these highlights. Whatever it is, if you want to keep digging deeper or try this on another passage, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel, and I constantly am suggesting new things to study. I'd also suggest that you get in a habit where you're setting aside a time every day or every week so that you can focus on that quality time rather than the quantity. So that's it for today's study, and Daniel's boldness is such an inspiration. If his story challenged you, I've always got more resources to help you stay consistent in the Word at amycenter.com. Download that guide, that free guide to the simple method. It will pop up on almost every page. That if you subscribe over there, you get freebies and a discount to my shop. Make sure to download that guide, explore these pages, and revisit a past lesson that stood out. If this video helped you, please share it with a friend who needs a little courage today. You're not alone. See you next time. Thank you so much for joining me.